there are many, many sections in the Course that are very beautiful and moving accounts of the real world. This is one of them. We're just going to read one paragraph from here. And as we indicated earlier, that we literally perceive what we have made up. And there's that important line that's repeated twice in the text: projection makes perception. We first decide what our reality is or what our self is, and then we project it out. And then what we project out is what we will see. So that if we first decide that we are guilty, sinful, separated fragments, then that's what we project out, and that will be the world that we see. If, on the other hand, we realize that we are guiltless children of God, and all of this is just a feverish imagination of somebody who's dreaming, and the dream was already over. In fact, the dream never even happened. And that's what we see when we look within, which is what Jesus holds out for all of us. Then that will be the world we perceive. And that's what this beautiful section is a description of. It's the world that we perceive when sin has left. And it's not that sin has left outside. It's that we have undone our belief in the reality of sin within.
Okay, it's paragraph 2 that I'll be reading from. Forgiveness turns the world of sin into a world of glory, wonderful to see. Each flower shines in light, and every bird sings the joy of heaven. There is no sadness, and there is no parting here, for everything is totally forgiven. And what has been forgiven must join, for nothing stands between to keep them separate and apart. The sinless must perceive that they are one, for nothing stands between to push the other off. And in the space that sin left vacant, do they join as one, in gladness, recognizing what is part of them has not been kept apart and separate. All right, so part of the process then, as it says here, in the forgiveness process, is that I recognize somehow, some way, that I made this all up, that you're separate from me. I made up this whole dream where I made you the bad guy, or the part of, or somebody who victimizes me most of the time, and that sometimes is nice to me, that I made this part for you in my dream. And when I can see that clearly, that this is a dream I'm dreaming, and I can access this, and I can forgive all the dream, the entire contents of the dream, I will experience this total forgiveness that it talks about here. Until that time, what we do is we forgive in little parts, so that if I, for example, have this experience that we talked about before, where you came into my life and then I blame you for all my miserable unhappiness, and let's say that it activated this big chunk of guilt in here, all right, so that when you came into my life, I blamed you, and I said, you're responsible for how I feel. But this is the guilt that really came up to my mind, and then I'm pushing on your head. Now, if I can see I made this all up, what happens is that this guilt disappears, so that the iceberg, in effect, shrinks that much more. So I have to draw a smaller iceberg now. Because of that big chunk of guilt that forgiveness let go of. And so this iceberg keeps melting and melting each time I realize that the person that I'm blaming in my life is not really the person to blame, because I made it all up. And every time I practice another piece of forgiveness, my iceberg keeps melting and melting and melting until there's no iceberg. All right, and that's the real world, which we'll get to in a moment, right?
Not quite a moment, yes.
Right, one moment?
A few moments.
A few
yes.
moments.
Before we move on, another way of understanding what forgiveness is, and it's been implicit in what both Gloria and I have said up to now, but we haven't actually labeled it as such, is that forgiveness really is nothing more than the process of looking at the ego thought system that you have not looked at before. Remember, we said that what you always do before you project your guilt, whether you do it collectively by making up a world, or you do it individually by blaming other people for something, that before you project, you always deny, which means you look away from your guilt and then you project it out. Projection must always follow denial. It can never occur without there first being denial. Therefore, if you want to undo projection, which is really one very clear way of understanding what forgiveness is, you simply have to look at what you have denied. By undoing denial, which means you look instead of repress, by undoing denial, you automatically undo projection. And projection basically comes in two forms. Either I project the guilt from my mind onto your body, or the world at large, saying that you are responsible for my dis-ease and my pain and suffering, or I project it onto my body and I get sick. And you do this whether you do it on your physical body or your personality. It doesn't matter. It's really the same idea. But once you undo denial, there's no projection, which means there's no anger, and it means there's no sickness or pain. Right? That's a hard and fast rule. Therefore, forgiveness is simply looking at the ego thought system you have denied or have been afraid of looking at. Right? This really is the proper role of Jesus and the Holy Spirit. So when over and over again in the Course, Jesus appeals to us to take his hand and to look with him and to let him help us, this is how he helps us. He helps us look at the core of the ego dream, namely that we believe we've pushed love away, we believe we've pushed Jesus away, and we're overwhelmed by guilt. So overwhelmed that we can't accept responsibility for it, so again we project it out and make up a world and attack it, and then believe it will attack us in return. But when you turn to him for help, which again is what help means, and you look at him, look with him, and what the ego thought system is, then you begin to develop that gentle smile that says, there's nothing there I should be upset about. I'm literally making it all up. So that's what forgiveness is.